Alright, in this first lesson we're going to learn how to access the 3ds Max render setup, and we're going to learn how we can switch between a couple of different rendering engines found inside of 3ds Max. Alright, so like I was saying in the intro, before we really get into the process of lighting and materials and things like that, one of the first questions you're going to have is how do I actually render what is currently in my viewport? So before we actually start to talk too much about that, what we first need to do is choose the render engine that's going to be used. So 3ds Max comes with a couple of different rendering engines. One is the default Scanline renderer, and the other is MetalRay. Now, when it comes to choosing between those, we can do that within the render setup. And there's a couple of different ways of getting to that area. One is through the rendering menu, so we can go up to rendering and just access the render setup. We can also use the keyboard shortcut, which is F10. Or if you're going to be using this menu, we can slide this down in case you don't have enough room on your screen. And kind of down toward the end, we have this little teapot with the little menu in front. That is the icon for the render setup. So if we click on that, this will pull open the render setup panel. And you can see up top, right next to the render setup text, we have the words default Scanline renderer. This is indicating that this is the render engine that's going to be used. So if we want to change this, we can scroll all the way down to the bottom of this Common tab. All the way down at the bottom we have this Assign Renderer rollout. If we click on that, that will expand that. And now we can choose the production, which right now is set to the default Scanline renderer. If we click on this little button over here, we can choose between a couple of different rendering engines. So if I were to choose MetalRay, press OK, you can see now MetalRay is loaded up as the renderer, and we can also see that the text MetalRay renderer is located now next to this render setup. So if we wanted to see what is currently within our view, we want to make sure we have the right viewport selected, and we can tell because it should have this little kind of a yellowish border around it. If we need to, a quick way of actually changing your view is to just come in here and middle click. That way you can actually change your view without having to worry about selecting or deselecting anything. So I'm going to middle click inside my perspective view to make sure that this is being rendered. And now if I click this little render button down at the bottom of this render setup, give this just a moment. All right, and there we are. So whenever it comes to rendering, as a matter of personal preference, I always like to use the MetalRay renderer. You'll find that you'll get a little bit better quality, and there's actually a lot of features and a lot of materials within 3ds Max that can only be used by the MetalRay renderer. Now, we're not really going to spend just a great deal of time talking about all the features and all the benefits that you get with the MetalRay renderer. If you want to learn more about that, you can take a look at our Introduction to MetalRay course, where we do discuss all those different features and in a great amount of detail. And we'll also talk a little bit more about MetalRay materials within this course whenever we start to get into our lesson dealing with the 3ds Max material editor. Right, so if you're not sure just which rendering engine you are actually using, again, quick and easy way to tell is to open up your render setup and take a look at which renderer is currently highlighted. Another easy way to tell is within this render view. If you have this set of menu options that are right below the render view, these are only visible if you're using MetalRay. So what we should see is if we were to take this back to our default Scanline render, press OK, you notice as soon as the Scanline render is activated, those menu items just below this view will disappear. Right. And again, just because as a matter of personal preference, I do like to use the MetalRay renderer almost exclusively, what we can do is come in, set this as our renderer, and now we can choose to save this as defaults. That'll say default saved, and now anytime I start a new 3ds Max scene, the MetalRay renderer will always be the default renderer from this point forward. Alright, so in our next lesson we're going to start to break down some of the features that are found within this rendered frame window.